SaaS Backwards is sponsored by Austin Lawrence Group, specializing in demand gen for SaaS. It sure is noisy. I deleted 100 emails from vendors just this morning. Your buyer has gotten better at ignoring you, and you're gonna need a big idea if you want to cut through all that clutter. Austin Lawrence is just the right agency to help you find it. So if your campaigns are falling on deaf eyeballs, let's talk. Visit austinlawrence.com today and let's build something bigger.
Welcome to the SaaS Backwards podcast, where we reverse engineer the success of fast-growing SaaS firms and explore strategies CMOs and CEOs are using to drive their businesses forward.
Welcome to SaaS Backwards, a podcast that helps SaaS CMOs and CEOs to accelerate growth and enhance profitability. Our guest today is Brandon Metcalf, CEO and founder of Place, a SaaS that helps businesses using Salesforce to orchestrate subscription and billing operations, automate and share important financial metrics and calculations, and collaboratively plan for the future. Hey, Brandon, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Ken, thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And before we dig into our action-packed episode, could you tell people just a little bit about yourself and your company,
Sure.
Place?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a bit of a serial entrepreneur. My background, I started in financial services. I started in banking, and then I stumbled into staffing and recruiting. When I was in staffing and recruiting, I got really frustrated with the technology that was available. So I thought I could build a better software. So I set out to do that. And that was my first company, a company called Talent Rover, that I started conceptualizing what the software was going to do in 2009. We incorporated in 2011. Scaled it globally. We had a really good run. Inc. 500 rated us as the 9th fastest growing software company in America in 2017. And by the time we sold to our biggest competitor in March of 2018, we had offices in 8 countries and customers in more than 40 countries. Talent Rover was built on the Salesforce platform. And then shortly after we got acquired, I had the idea of solving some of the problems that we faced when scaling Talent Rover, especially around financial forecasting. So at the end of 2018, we decided to set out to actually build a financial forecasting product on Salesforce, which was Place. At the same time, coincidentally, I was getting hit up by a lot of people that knew me to do some just freelance consulting work. So that freelance consulting work actually turned into its own business, which became one of my companies, Blueprint Advisory, which is growing strong and a great company right now. And then for Place, we started building 2019. Started sales in 2020, which was quite the fun time to launch a new software company. And then since then, we've evolved quite a bit where we realized financial forecasting wasn't truly the thing that our clients fully needed. So we added a customer subscription management module, and then we added a revenue and billing module and the metrics and analytics. So we pretty much complete the whole sales to cash workflow for B2B SaaS companies using Salesforce. And then earlier this year, we had been consulting Salesforce on how to think about recruiting, since that's what Talent Rover really was. And through those conversations and that collaboration, we ended up deciding to launch a new recruiting software on Salesforce called Assemble, which officially launched in the middle of January this year. So we've got a lot going on.
That's awesome. Well, I mean, entrepreneurism is like this, such a dynamic and fun. It's a fun place to be. Being your own boss, charting your own path is a lot of fun. But I'm curious, we've had a thread through the podcast of subject matter experts starting a software company. It seems to be a thing. You have a problem you can't solve with the tools that are at hand, and you say, aha, this could be a business. How did you make that decision to jump from being, executive in a corporation to your first entrepreneur?
Yeah. So when I was in staffing and recruiting, I was at Kelly Services for a while. So a big multi-billion dollar firm, really frustrated with the technology they had back then. And then I got recruited away to a headhunting firm for senior level finance people called CV Partners in San Francisco. So I started at that company. First, I was doing direct search myself. I was searching for CFOs to place at different tech companies around the country. And then eventually I evolved to take over running technology for the company. And part of taking over technology was changing everything so we could scale the business. So that meant changing infrastructure, so hardware, like phone systems, all of that. But then it also meant looking at our software that we were using and saying, is this really scalable? We were very, very frustrated with the software that we had. So looked at everything in the market and just said, this is nuts. There's not really what I felt was a good solution for what we were trying to do. And I thought we were so similar to so many other firms and so similar to what I was doing at Kelly that I was like, I think I could build a better software. So no professional software experience.
I was going to ask you if you had any tech background.
Not really. I've always been technical, but not a true engineer or anything like that. So I developed the V1 of what eventually became Talent Rover. I got it to a strong enough place that it made sense, but then I needed some real development talent to come in to take it to the next level. So that's what we were doing in 2009. When we got it to a good place in I think 2010, 2011-ish is when we started to really decide to commercialize it. Because originally Talent Rover was just going to be used by us at CB Partners, but then we realized there was a big opportunity. And luckily we decided to take the chance and we're off to the races.
So this was really intrapreneuring the first time.
Yeah, I was trying to solve the problem that we were actually faced with, and that was my job to figure out. And because I just didn't really see a solution that I thought would get us there, and I also really wanted to be on Salesforce. And back in 2008, 2009, I mean, Salesforce is not what it is now. But I had the thought that, that company is someone to latch onto because it's just going to continue to grow and be super innovative and really push the needle on everything. And that was one of the bets that I got right with, Salesforce's success and their level of engagement and candidate and client engagement possibilities. It's just a great platform, which I then made pretty much a whole career out of, because not only was Talent Rover built on Salesforce, Blueprint, my consulting firm, we're a consulting firm for Salesforce products, building Salesforce products, customizing Salesforce, all of that. Place is built on Salesforce and Assemble is built on Salesforce. So clearly there's something about that blue cloud that I'm stuck with.
Well, I definitely want to dig in on that a little bit later. But I think, though, the thing you illuminated here for folks that are on a corporate side is that maybe you don't have to jump all the way to being an entrepreneur first go, right? You can intrapreneur, get the experience of building a solution. And I'm not sure how you guys split the pie or if there was any pie for you to split there, but you certainly get the experience of taking expertise and creating a product without taking all the risk of being a 100% full tilt entrepreneur.
Yeah, I mean, for us, no one in the company was a software person at CB Partners. Like, we were tried and true experts in staffing and recruiting. We really understood how the business worked and why the business worked that way and how to make it run successfully. So this thought of how do we solve this technology piece was foreign to all of us. Luckily, the CEO, Kent Gray, was a bit of a risk taker. He and I co-founded Talent Rover together, best friends since. He's actually on my board of a place now. But he had a lot of confidence in me to be able to figure out how to solve this problem and find the resources to help me solve the problem, and took that bet. And I talk a lot about this, like my career, I've gotten to where I'm at, one, because I'm not afraid to take risks and work a lot and do what's necessary to make it successful. But I've had people invest in me, and Kent's investment in me in that situation led to us co-founding Talent Rover and, having honestly a life-changing exit. But then earlier in my career in banking, when I was in my very early 20s, I think I was like 21, I was given the opportunity to manage my own banking center because I talked with an executive vice president at the bank and I said, how do I get your job? And she said, here's the things you need to go do this. And I said, great, I'm going to go do that. And I started doing it. And then she held her end of the bargain. And it's that investment back from the people that you're working with and the people that you're working for that can really change the dynamic of someone's life. So I try to do that as much as I can as well.
So for budding entrepreneurs, the relationships are really super important then, right? If you're good at building, maintaining, and taking care of relationships, you can have a benefit that you can share and really gain from. And so that's probably a great lesson too. Good people can finish first, right?
Exactly.
I think that's really important. I think having met my share, probably, near 1,000 entrepreneurs, I certainly remember most fondly the ones that were good partners, and they're diabolical opposites. I probably remember.
I've met my share of those too.
Fair enough. So let's dig into this idea of building on the great blue cloud. That's a really interesting that you've had this like decades long at this point, right? We're talking about almost 15 years of working on the Salesforce cloud, even before I guess they called it such. Talk about that decision and how that's played out for you. And obviously it's a repeat pattern, so it's worked out, but early on, how did you decide that was where to be? And what have been the opportunities?
So I was in San Francisco, which of course is where Salesforce is headquarters. So I knew quite a few people at Salesforce. Salesforce was actually a client of ours too for recruiting. And then when I was at Kelly, prior to working at CV Partners, they also used Salesforce. So I've been in the Salesforce ecosystem since really about 2004. And when I started to understand some of the flexibility that you can have with how you can configure it, I mean, even back in those days, it was unlike anything I've ever seen, where you didn't need to be a true coder to make changes and customizations to get to workflows and processes that made sense for your business. Since then, they've dramatically amplified that to the ninth degree. But, to me, it gave a platform where you could really design a workflow that makes sense for what you're trying to accomplish. So then I just continued to dig in deeper and deeper. And really what I liked about Salesforce too was the fact of the engagement. Because it's focused primarily on sales, how do you engage with people? How do you connect with people? How do you talk to people? How do you record those conversations? How do you manage the process of moving those conversations forward? So it became like this workforce engine where this is where all your data lives about all of your customer interactions. So for me, the mindset was, well, if all my customer interactions are there, shouldn't I put the rest of the business there so everyone's on the same page with what's happening? And then Salesforce continued to invest in the platform and the platform play. I think now it's like nearly a $2 trillion ecosystem when you factor in all the partners. So it's been an incredible ride. It's not always been easy. I mean, Salesforce is a massive company, and back in those days, they had a lot of things to figure out. I always joke that it was a bit like the Wild Wild West back then. Since then, of course, they've become more sophisticated, but you're still, you're using someone else's platform per se. So you've got to play by their rules of how they want you to do things and why they want you to do things in a certain way, especially because Salesforce platform is what they call multi-tenant. So many different companies are in the same instances, if you will. Everything's secured off and walled off from each other, but what you do in your product can have an impact on someone else's if it's not architected in the right way. So Salesforce is very strict with some of those things. They're also very strict with security and compliance, which they have to be. I mean, no one wants to get hacked and have all that data out there. So there's a lot of lessons that we've learned over the decades now of building in Salesforce of how to do it well, because Lord knows we screwed it up enough times. There's also the mindset of how do you sell successfully, either with or against Salesforce as a Salesforce partner, which was an interesting dynamic as well that we really learned. But like any ecosystem, it's the level of investment that your team makes, that your decision as to why that ecosystem makes sense. Are your customers going to be in that ecosystem? Do they like it? What value do you get? It's just been overall a rewarding process for us, which is why I continue to build companies on the platform.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. And certainly with some of our clients over the years, we've said, hey, you have this data that would love to live in a platform where there are millions of potential users. And I think it's really interesting here. We have actually a niche, a couple, where, it really makes sense. You have all this people data and people that care about people. Why not stay right on the platform? I mean, it makes a lot of sense instead of trying to move that data around and that user experience, right? In a lot of ways, I guess you don't even have to build your own user experience, right?
You get a huge uplift from their UI, their reporting, their architecture, their structure, all of that. And then the offset is learning how to successfully program the way that they want it programmed. And then also how to take your vision for what your product wants to do and how do you embed that so that it cohesively works with a lot of the other pieces of Salesforce. Because, like one of the things to think about is we can create a product, but it can't look and operate vastly different from how core Salesforce looks, because then the user gets confused. They go to this page and it works like Salesforce. They go to this page and it looks like your product. And if those two things are vastly different, you're going to have a terrible user experience. And then also you need to think about, as Salesforce rolls out more enhancements, which they do all the time, how is your product going to work with that? And can you take advantage of those enhancements? Because the other benefit that you get with building on Salesforce is it's constantly being innovated. So your product is really never stagnant as long as you approach it that way, because Salesforce is never stagnant. So there's a lot of pluses. There's a cost for it, where there's a cost of goods sold that goes into it, where there's a certain license percentage that you have to pay Salesforce for using their platform. But I've done the math, and the math to me, where the acceleration that you get for going to market, for their overall user experience, for the reputation. Like at Talent Rover, we won the global relationship with Deco, this massive $24 billion, I think, company at the time. We were a 50-person company. If we weren't built on Salesforce, there is no way we would have qualified to be considered to win that deal. But because we were on Salesforce, we checked all of the scalability, the security, the reliability issues that they were going to look at.
So that's really interesting because as you were talking about this, I was thinking, boy, there's a real cost of acquisition play here, or there's some other benefits that seem they kind of almost pale in comparison to what you just talked about with being able to qualify up in market much more quickly than a young software company might otherwise. So there's probably a lot for others considering their first software company to consider here, a lot to take advantage of if it's the right kind of fit. That's really awesome. And, I think we've done 54 episodes. No one's built on Salesforce of those 54. So I don't know if maybe you're going to be spawning some more people in the cohort with this episode.
There's a lot of brilliant entrepreneurs on it. Salesforce, the ecosystem, I think there's roughly 7,000 applications built for the App Exchange, the Salesforce marketplace. Only about 20% of those are really significant from a revenue producing standpoint, but there's a lot of activity. So it's an interesting ecosystem too, because you got to figure out how you're going to sell. Do you sell with Salesforce? Do you sell against Salesforce? All of those different things.
Well, apparently we have a vote locally on at least one of those choices.
We do.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about was your take on the Challenger sale. I think when we met to plan the episode, we talked a little bit about Challenger sale, and we think it's really important to motivate people to think differently about their own businesses in order to gain permission to sell them. And I'm wondering how that plays out for you with Place and how you've adapted the methodology.
Yeah, so we've tried a lot of different things with Place, and what's interesting about having three separate businesses is the perspectives you gain from running those businesses. And as much as they're all sort of related, they're all in the same ecosystem, they're on Salesforce. My consulting firm now does all of our implementations and support for both of the software companies. The two software companies are independent of each other because one's in staffing and recruiting and one's in B2B SaaS. But then the go-to-market for all three products are very different. For the consulting firm, our revenue is 100% from people we know in the ecosystem. So we don't have a big sales team for Blueprint, but it's a multi-billion-dollar profitable business that's doing really well. For Assemble, it's really interesting because it's this recruiting product that's very different from my first company, Talent Rover, which was also a recruiting product built on Salesforce. With Talent Rover, we were 100% outbound, and we spent a fortune on that, flying, doing meetings in person, doing all of that. It was extremely expensive for customer acquisition, but we were also selling very large deals. With Assemble, it's a partnership with Salesforce. At this moment, we have a really large pipeline, and 100% of every single one of those deals is coming directly from Salesforce. So very different channel play. What we always wanted at Talent Rover, but we could never figure out how to do it. But we were very intentional with how we built the Assemble product to incentivize Salesforce to want to be that channel partner for us. It was both a pricing strategy and an architecture strategy of the product. At Place, we originally thought we could be a product-led growth company back in 2020. We realized that that was not going to work because with all the financial information, you just needed more hands-on. So then we became an outbound focused firm, which also was okay, but it never really popped. Over the past 14, 16 months, we've flipped that script to now an inbound and really focusing on a self-led buyer journey. So our whole branding, messaging, website's been refreshed, everything's different. So if you go to the Place website, you can easily figure out what we do. Well, hopefully you can. That's the goal. You can easily figure out what we do and what value we offer you before you need to talk to us. Because before we made that switch, we saw a lot of traffic coming to the Place website, but we weren't getting a lot of inbound leads. And really, we realized that people want more information. They want to know what they're signing up for if they request a demo, because once you request a demo, at that point, you've got to talk to people, your time is going to be committed. There is a process that you're about to go through and you've got to be ready for it.
Right. So, you definitely have a process cost, right?
Yeah. And before I do that, I want to know what I'm signing up for. I want to know more about this. I want to know about the people. I want to know about, what the product does, what the value does, all of that. So we took an approach of how do we connect more with our target audience so that they can really understand us, how we think, what we're doing and why we're doing it. So we focused heavily on a LinkedIn content play. where like if you look at my profile on LinkedIn, I post almost every day. And it's not really pitching any of the companies. I mean, sometimes there's stuff in there about their products and all of that, of course, but it's a lot of thought leadership that is designed to really focus on our core audience of who we think would be interested in what we're doing at Place. And then it's also like why I created a podcast. So I have Cash and Burn, which I get to talk to other SaaS CEOs and executives about something I've always talked to them about not recording, which is like when I go with another founder or CEO, it's like, what's going on in your world? I want to hear about the tough things that you're facing because I want to learn from you on how you're facing them and how you're overcoming them. So the whole point of my podcast is that exact conversation is what's the biggest things that you're challenged with and how did you survive them? And there's just a ton of good content that comes from that. So it was a very focused, how do we get content out about who we are, what we do, why we do it, and become more of a thought leader in general that these prospects can connect with. And then we went down the path of, all right, now that we're getting this basis of people that are becoming aware of us, how do we really educate them if they do have this need that we're the product for them to buy, which is why the website revamp came in. It's why the terminology changed and our messaging changed and all of that. And then all of a sudden we saw a flurry of inbound activity happen. Last quarter, for the first time, we actually had more inbound, not only opportunities coming in, but revenue produced than any other quarter in the history of the company. And we're continuing to see that trend upward. And it's because of that mindset and being intentional of, we really believe in the product we have. I use it at all three of my own companies. So we know what it does. We know why it does it. How do we educate people? This is what we do and why, to see if it's the fit for them so that when we talk with them, they're prepared. Like one of the deals we won last quarter was really fun because he came prepared. He knew everything about us. He knew all of our competitors. He had some assumptions of our pros and cons, all of that stuff. He was ready to go. We closed that deal. Well, we got a verbal acceptance in 7 days from that conversation. Our typical sales cycle is at least 60 to 70 something days. So that flipping of the script and arming them with the knowledge about what we do, why we do it, and how we do it dramatically changed how that interaction went.
So, I'm sitting here listening to this. I'm thinking about all the conversations with CMOs and CEOs I've had where they don't want to be as transparent about their product, their pricing, the use cases, because they feel like they need to get into the sales conversation in order to arm twist the prospect to go through the journey. And it's just awesome to hear in real life, someone actually doing it and at the CEO level being, driving it and bought in. That's awesome.
Well, we're doing it because it didn't work the other way. So we had that same mindset of, let's just get them in the sales process. And then we started looking at, why are companies not buying our product? And it became clear 50% of the reason why people didn't buy is because they bought nothing. Yeah. So we educated them on what could happen versus finding the people that really have the problem that we can solve for them and educating them on why we can solve it and why it's different so that when they came into us, they're prepared. Our close win ratio has gone up 7x since we flipped the script. It's insane.
Amazing. Do you get the trust radius research on, the changing buyer behavior? Are you familiar with that?
I'm not, but I'd love to learn more about it.
Yeah. So these guys are led by a really brilliant CEO. And I think the playbook you're executing is exactly, I think, where the business has to go. I can tell you, in the last few years, we've had these experiences where the client demands this heavy outbound motion, and we know how hard it is. And we say how hard it is. And yet our mandate is, go climb that cliff, right? We're going to make this as hard as possible for everybody to succeed.
And spend a lot of money doing it.
Money, time, blood, sweat, and tears, and, unmet expectations, which is, not really good in my business. So it's really great to hear that. And I think it's encouraging that it's coming from you. That's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, look, we screwed up a lot of things along the way, right? So one of our challenges at Place was really figuring out what is the true product market fit that our customers want. I think we finally have gotten there as we rolled out customer subscription and we really connected the core daily Salesforce user, which is sales and customer success people, all the way through to the finance team. Because when we first started selling the product, like we were a financial forecasting product built on Salesforce. Finance people don't necessarily love Salesforce because they get sales data out of it and they don't really like the sales data they get out of it. So we had an uphill battle of like, how do we convince the finance buyer to do financial forecasting in Salesforce? And that was a tough argument to make. But when we started to then branch out and say, well, finance needs accurate sales data and revenue data. That's why they don't like Salesforce. What if we start solving those problems? And as we started solving that problem, then we're like, well, there's actually a workflow journey here for the people who use Salesforce every day that just want a simple process to win deals, win renewals, manage the whole automation of that, and get it all to finance so finance is happy and they can just focus on the customer and closing deals. When we piece that all together, that's when all of a sudden it was like, okay, now we feel like we've got product market fit. And that's when our whole go-to-market started to change of like, okay, we've now unlocked that. How do we better educate and tell people about it? So we spent a lot of time looking at and analyzing the whole cycle and saying, where possibly could we be struggling? And that's why we changed the things that changed and why we're at where we're at right now.
That's an amazing journey. That's awesome. So can we talk a little bit about, the technology, the marketing tech that you guys use, and where you use it and why?
Yeah, I mean, my head of marketing will know much more than I do on this. I'm also part of my management style is I hire what I hope to be really smart people and I get out of their way and I actually listen to them. I learned that a long time ago. At Talent River, I was very controlling of the whole company and I never really gave people breathing room to, do their own thing. I've completely changed that and it's working really well. So I hired Carter, our VP of marketing, in the beginning of 2022. And it's really his brilliance that changed a lot of the stuff that we're doing and me getting out of his way to let him do it. So being a big Salesforce guy, Salesforce is our CRM. That is not changing, but we were using Pardot and we didn't know how to use Pardot before Carter came and said, we're getting rid of Pardot. We're going to HubSpot. So we use HubSpot for our marketing element and then Salesforce for our CRM and a lot of our operational pieces. The rest of the stack, I can't really give you a clear answer. If there were specific components of it, I could tell you. He could rattle off everything we're doing. My big thing is leads are coming in, salespeople are happy, and deals are closing from inbound. So whatever he's doing, it's working.
Well, what is your role in helping Carter drive that opportunity? What are you doing to help him?
Sanity check, pushing back on, okay, explain why this is going to work, taking risks with him. Like I remember the day he said, hey, you're going to launch a podcast. I was like, I really don't want to launch a podcast. I don't have time. I've got 3 companies. I've got everything going on. I'm on multiple nonprofit boards. I'm like, there's a lot going on in my world. He's like, you just got to trust me. He was right. Podcast has been great and I actually love doing it. So that worked. The changing of the message, like who we are and how we talk about ourselves, that was very, very collaborative. Of like when he first came in, he's like, I just can't say what we do in a simple sentence. How do we get there? Because what we do is so complex and it's so broad. That took us a long time to figure out exactly how to phrase it and how to talk about it. We struggled back in when we were selling to finance people only the forecasting product. We struggled with, do we talk about the fact that we're built on Salesforce? Do we avoid the fact that we're built on Salesforce until we get them really hooked on what we do? Sort of like what we were talking about before. So for the first couple of years, Salesforce was the afterthought to all these finance people what we did because we didn't want them to be nervous before they had a conversation with us. You go to our website, it's pretty clear we're built on Salesforce. We're on Salesforce. We shout it from the rooftop now. And it was that collaboration between the two of us and other people in the organization as well that really changed our mindset of like, Salesforce is the biggest differentiator we have. Why are we not talking about it, but in the right context to the right people? So all of this, to answer your question better, it was just this collaborative process where I had a lot of trust in him and still do. And I think he has a lot of trust in me. That we are not afraid to push back respectfully, challenge, ask questions, dig in. But I also know he's a much better marketing person than I am. And I have to trust that. And he knows there's areas that, I'm more skilled at than he is. And it's that back and forth that we really formed a bond there that I think has enabled him to execute the way that he has.
Well, I think you're both lucky to have that because, also meeting all of these entrepreneurs, I've seen this full spectrum of partnership between CEO and the direct reports. And sounds like you've arrived at a really good way of helping your folks succeed.
Well, it's a two-way street, right? So like if my direct report isn't willing to be somewhat vulnerable and open to feedback and also challenge me a bit and vice versa, if I'm not open to hearing someone challenge me and if I get mad or whatever, if they do, or it's my way or the highway, it won't work. And, I learned that at Talent River, you really didn't challenge me too much. It was kind of my direction. This is where we're going. And what I learned is that's very limiting. It's just my thought and my vision, and I'm not great at all things. I'm really good at certain things. There's other things that just aren't my expertise, and marketing is one of them. So why, if I'm not the smartest guy about marketing, do I pretend, or would I want to pretend that I am? Let's just go find someone who's really good at it and hire them. And, my journey of finding Carter and the hiring decision was actually, I think, a key to the success here, where before I started the search, I was really clear on what I needed and why. So place, we had a couple marketing managers, great guys. They just weren't the right fit for how we were going to change the dynamic of the company. So I set out, and I was very specific. I used a recruiter, a lot of great candidates. And Carter was the one. As soon as I met him and we had a conversation, I'm like, your background, your mindset, your skills, this is exactly what we need. And it's been a great relationship since. But it's like that for other direct reports as well, where, you don't always get them right. But the more specific you are, and I talk about this a lot, the more specific you are with what you need from the direct report, and also who you need from the direct report, I think is what's going to make them successful and you successful. And if you're not clear on either one of those things, you're probably not going to hire the right person.
Hey, I think that's a great place to land this episode. There's a lot there for people who'd like to be as successful as you've been with your companies. If people want to learn more about Place, how can they do that?
I mean, there's a lot of ways to find me. I'm kind of all over the place, right? So placetechnology.com is their website. My LinkedIn is kind of like the main source for all of my madness. So feel free to connect with me there as well.
That's awesome. And if people want to reach me, I'm on LinkedIn/in/Ken Lempit. And hopefully, if you haven't subscribed to the podcast yet, please find SaaS Backwards wherever podcasts are distributed. And what's the name of your podcast again?
Cash and Burn.
I think you're covering a lot of interesting territory in that podcast as well. I think there's real opportunity for SaaS CEOs and other leaders in the SaaS organizations to learn from your podcast. You're doing a great job with it. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me on, Ken.
Thanks for listening to the SaaS Backwards podcast, brought to you by Austin Lawrence Group. We're a growth marketing agency that helps SaaS firms reduce churn, accelerate sales, and generate demand. Learn more about us at www.austinlawrence.com. You can email Ken Lempit at kl@austinlawrence.com about any SaaS marketing or customer retention subject. We hope you'll subscribe, and thanks again for listening.